engagement, and we've done this at our conferences, and good to keep doing this in the future. I don't think we should leave the question just at mana and unite, although I agree with those fundamental points that that's where the unity is occurring and playing out. But we should consider concepts going forward, like at specific stages. Like, I'm not sure about merging, and I agree with these points that have been made about mergers and such forth, but we shouldn't rule out things like coalitions, formal coalitions, and that type of thing as, you know, certain steps at different stages. I think that, you know, today we've heard about a lot of great struggles. We're still faced with this issue that Jane Kelsey raised, and I think in a very good way a couple of years ago when we had the Unite and Broad Left discussion out of Mangere, and she talked about New Zealand being in a relative political bubble compared to the rest of the world. And I definitely think that we would have to agree with that. And the reality is that 3/4 of the world, there's insurrectionary moods existing, or insurrections themselves. So, you know, we should take stock of that in our analysis and look at where we are. I want to talk about like the economic situation, and I'll just start by having a little talk about New Zealand's positioning. In 2011, just under a fifth of New Zealand businesses, 18% of businesses generated income from overseas enterprises. Australia and China are the two countries on which the relative stability of the New Zealand economy is most reliant. And of New Zealand businesses with overseas income, 76 report income generated from exports, provision of services and production in Australia, and 30% report such income from China. While this 30% from China is not incredibly high on the face of it, as there are more business engagements with the US and Pacific nations, there are two reasons why China stands out, and it should be very clear that that China is a key factor in New Zealand's prosperity. Firstly, of businesses which engage with overseas production, 46% report that they have production in China, as opposed to just engagements, but actually engage in overseas production. That's the highest number of engagements, and is followed by Australia, in which 43% report that they have production. Secondly, Australia has a narrow export base, with 20% of its exports being based in mining, and then additionally you've got the mining-based economy on top of that as well. So that what this means is that this is another way through which, and those exports are predominantly to China, so this is another way through which the China question is extremely important for New Zealand. So that being the case, that kind of sets up, I think, it provides some direction as to what the political future is going to be, given that the Chinese economy is not is growing, but there's a slowdown in its growth. So this year, like the Wall Street Journal just said this year it was 7.5, next year is 7.6. But that's still well down on this period of boom that has sustained in support of this when they were having double-figure percentage increases. That's well down, and this will have an effect on Australia and New Zealand economies going forward. So basically this is the leaping off point for saying that all these oppressions and struggles that we've talked about today, we could be quite certain that these types of things are going to continue, and the situation is going to worsen and get harder. So these oppressions that we're talking about, low wages, unemployment, cuts, etc., etc. So this also has an effect on our view of what the benefit will be of a Labour government, because we know that if we don't have a radical government, that things are going to continue to get worse for the working class and for oppressed people in general. So I think another just interesting point to raise, I think, is that last year the International Labour Organisation, for the first time ever, did a study, provided a study which showed that for the first time they showed wages compared country to country, inflation adjusted, to show what your wage actually gets from country to country, essentially. New Zealand came in under Iceland, Spain and Greece. Yes, in that order. Iceland, Spain and Greece, that's where New Zealand came. So that's what the actual material conditions are in New Zealand, despite the fact that we have been somewhat sheltered from the current crisis. It's already all the cuts and so forth have already fundamentally, not all the cuts, but there's already been the fundamental structural change in New Zealand that we're now witnessing in other countries. So I think that we, based on this, I mean, it paints a picture of very bad objective conditions for the working class. We don't have the same unemployment, the same 50% unemployment as in Greece or Spain, or so we don't have that type of unemployment. But in terms of wages, that's where we're sitting. So I think this indicates that those objective conditions are there, and we yet don't have the same level of struggle. It indicates the importance that we have to put upon the subjective questions, the type of organisation, the type of politics, what we're actually putting forward out there, and how we operate, what type of organisation do we need. So I think a term that some of us have started to use is the term dual strategy, and basically this means that, and it's in agreement with some of the speakers this morning, that we have to participate in building a principled Marxist organisation at the same time, so dual strategy at the same time as participating in rebuilding the organisations of the working class and making those competitive organisations. And I might say, oh, big wow, just this term dual strategy, but it is actually effective to crystallise what approach we're taking to things and frame them and talk about what they are. That's important, or else an organisation can become very disorientated and go from this thing to that thing, or in some instances in the organisation I believe in, 1 minute it's ultra left, 1 minute it's certainly in its past, the next minute I think right opportunist, 1 minute you're a sellout because you help such and such campaign, next minute leadership might suggest something that was actually to the right of what you'd been accused of being sold out for, So it's very, very important, I think, to identify clearly what our roles are, those types of things. So I think this idea of dual strategy is important, and we would absolutely acknowledge that mana is a key area for that, as is Unite, and we'd absolutely acknowledge that Socialist Aotearoa has played a very good role in those struggles outside of the idea of building a Marxist organisation. I'd just like to, it also ties into what Joe was saying this morning. He talked about chalking up wins, that's absolutely true. And in terms of the party and the theory of the party, it's also about having cadre engaged in struggles. I mean, how are people going to lead a revolution? And I think it is a valid criticism of, to be honest, a lot of these organisations have died off now, but certainly around the late 90s and before the Iraq War and before the advent of Unite, the organisations that weren't getting involved in people's struggles, they didn't have the other part of the strategy there, and they've pretty much gone, So I think it's very important that we engage in those struggles, because people aren't going to be able to lead a revolution. It's just completely incomprehensible that people can lead a revolution if they can't take on the local principal who's banning GLBT people from going to a ball, or if they can't take on a local capitalist, if they can't make a victory, if they can't get a gain, there's absolutely no hope of them being able to carry out a socialist program. My last point is just about program, both with Fightback and CWI sympathisers. We think we're starting to come to the view that we do need to form a program. We talked about GLBT today, so I'll use that as an example, is that our comrades led a good struggle, and they had, say, 60 people. They were having organising meetings of 60 people in Wellington around GLBT meetings. These aren't forums, these are organising meetings. So that's very commendable work, and it's work that I'm proud that Fightback's done. The problem is, once we get to a certain point, what's next for that project? Does it degenerate into kind of anarcha, fashion, whatever, or do we form around a program and try and take that forward in a socialist direction, or do we act as Marxists at the head of what is largely liberal campaign? And I think it's an achievement for Marxists to be able to lead a liberal campaign, but how do we take it to the next level is the question. And I think that we really need to start underlining that, instead of like a approach where it's like a maximum, minimum type of approach, this is all the good things, but you can do this, that, or the next thing, is that we have to talk about program and what our ultimate gains are, and then and we have to connect our daily struggles to that, and that also feeds into this idea around the dual strategy. Thanks, guys. Thank you.